Many of us have heard the term biotechnology, but few of us really understand what it's all about. What really is biotechnology, and how does it affect our lives? Well, in this, the first of a 6-part series by the National Institute of Higher Education, Research, Science and Technology, NIHERST, we will attempt to shed some light on this technology and one of its most promising yet controversial applications, genetic engineering.
Biotechnology is any technique that uses living systems or parts thereof or substances from those systems to make or modify a product, improve plants or animals, or develop microorganisms for specific uses. For centuries, bakers, brewers have been using biotechnology essentially to make beer, cheese, yogurt, and bread. So in a sense, we have been basically consuming microorganisms for a long time.
The impact of biotechnology is seen principally in the areas of food and agriculture, medicine, and environmental protection, where it is applied in an effort to solve problems in these areas. One of the most talked about applications of biotechnology is genetic engineering. This technique allows for altering the genetic makeup of plants, animals, and microorganisms. All living organisms possess units called genes, which determine their characteristics and are passed on from generation to generation. Genetic engineering enables scientists to isolate a specific gene for a specific characteristic and transfer that bit of DNA from one organism to another. By changing the genes of an organism, scientists can alter the characteristics of that organism for specific uses. Some of these uses are increasing crop yields, making animals and crops resistant to disease, developing new drugs and medicine, and cleaning up oil spills.
It begins with living organisms, bacteria, virus, plants, animals, and we isolate genes from these. Each of them, you can isolate single or multiple genes from these. Once you have the genes isolated, you can take a piece from a bacterial gene, and a piece from a viral gene, and a plant gene, and maybe even from an animal, and put them together to make what's called a recombinant gene or a transgene. And there can also even be some synthetic DNA as part of those. Once you have the transgene, it must be introduced into a cell in order for it to do its job. What you end up with then is a cell that contains a transgene as well as conventional genetics. And when the tissue culture experts give such a cell some potions, it will actually cause it to differentiate and develop ultimately into a full-scale plant that produces seed and can be propagated. This is the basics of this process.
But how does this altering of living organisms affect us and our environment? What are the advantages and risks of biotechnology, in particular genetic engineering? This is what one scientist, George Wald, Nobel laureate in medicine, said about this. He said, "Up to now, living organisms have evolved very slowly and new forms have had plenty of time to settle in. Now whole proteins will be transposed overnight into wholly new associations with consequences no one can foretell, either to the host organism or to their neighbors." That means the ecosystem. What do scientists say about this process? Well, some say things like this. Farmers have been doing genetic engineering since before the time of Jesus Christ by selecting seeds from larger fruits or particular fruits or plants. That's essentially all we're doing. Nothing new here. Here, for instance, is a quote from one of the promoters of it. They say, "There is no scientific basis for any hazard being present in these foods. The way in which they have been developed doesn't introduce any new hazard to human health." From developing crops and animals that are resistant to diseases to new medicines that can help cure illnesses, genetic engineering holds significant potential for today's world. And while there are risks, continued testing, strict regulations and guidelines, and continued research can minimize these risks.